Hi, I'm Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer, and here with my amazing co-host, Dr. Pat Baccili.
Yahoo!
Woohoo! Welcome to the Psychic in the Doc, and we have a very special show today. Today we're exploring the phenomenon known as near-death experiences. Now, I think, because they're in the media a lot, people are familiar with the term, and most people are aware that a near-death experience involves when somebody clinically dies and their consciousness, soul, whatever you want to call the essence of who we are, separates from the body, travels through a tunnel into a white light and encounters spirits of deceased loved ones, a euphoria, a floating sensation. But the thing is, not all near-death experiences are like that. Some are quite different. And today, our special guest is Nancy Evans Bush. She is the foremost expert in the world on what is known as the distressing near-death experience, AKA the hellish NDE. And Nancy is uniquely qualified. She holds a bachelor's degree from the State University of New York and a master's degree in pastoral ministry and spirituality from St. Joseph University in Connecticut. She's also served as the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and she's become the go-to gal when it comes to distressing near-death experiences. In fact, Anne Rice hailed Nancy's first book, Dancing Past the Dark, Distressing Near-Death Experiences, as the Bible on the topic. Her second book, and this one I love, The Buddha in Hell, is on the distressing NDE, and coming soon is her highly anticipated third book. And I want to welcome you to the show, Nancy.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Pat.
I want to start out with a question because I think I'm the novice here. And I want to start out with a question that has to do with the differences between, the near-death experiences that we see mostly in our pop culture on television, right? We see those and everybody hugs and we're all happy and kumbaya. And then there is what you all are referencing, what we're talking about is distressing near-death experiences. And, for most people, they don't know the difference, but the difference is important, isn't it?
The difference is very important because it affects not only the experiencer, but everybody around the experiencer, everyone, whether we know anything about near-death experiences or not, everyone has some inborn fear of death. Given our culture, which for the past 700 and more years has talked about hell as eternal physical torment if you so much as blink wrong or believe wrong, we have worked ourselves into a state of real terror about dying. Am I going to be all right? Am I going to be all right? And for many people, it's, I know I'm not going to be all right. And they don't know it, but they believe it with all their heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the distinction. Most of what we talk about in public with NDEs is the beautiful experiences. And we should talk about them mostly because that's the basis of our trust, our faith, the idea that whatever happens, we're safe in the universe.
You know,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you what I was struck by, and this is really exactly what you're talking about, and Mark, jump in. You know, we are really good in our pop culture about really epitomizing what you just said. So, for example, let me give you an example that everybody, pretty much millions of people around the world, have seen the movie Ghost. And in the movie Ghost, there's a part in the movie where the bad guy, somehow one of the bad guys in the movies, and actually they were all men in the movie, the bad guys were all men. There weren't any bad women in this particular movie, but there's a point where you watch the good souls in the movie rise up. And then there's this really part. I mean, I'm telling you, this had an effect on me when I saw the movie. Then there's this other part where it implanted an image where the bad guy pretty much goes, and these black ghosty goblin shaped creatures grab him and drag him away.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember seeing that. It was very, yeah.
If that don't get you to go to confession, I don't know what will. But this is what our pop culture does, right? And most of us believe that.
Yes. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how terrible our behavior actually has been. In our minds, it always gets blown up because it's ours. It's the only thing we bring. If the worst thing I ever did in my life was the time I semi-deliberately stuck a diaper pin into my baby sister, then I can easily be convinced that that's enough to send me to hell.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, Nancy, you know, not only are you a grandmother, but you're a great grandmother. And most people don't think of their great grandmother as a researcher who temporarily went to hell. Okay. So, I mean, you know, and the thing is, I've come to know you not only as a colleague, but as a friend. And you're not the type of grandmother or great grandmother that sits on the porch knitting sweaters. You're out there doing research and writing these doctoral level papers and books about understanding this. So can you tell our listeners, what was your distressing near-death experience like?
Yeah.
And also, it was in a time when the term near-death experience didn't even exist. So
Right.
could you tell us about that?
Yeah,
Right.
tell us about that, because there was another phrase for that, Mark, wasn't there? And it wasn't a very pretty one. But yeah, tell us about that experience. I can only imagine.
This will prove um, just how different these experiences can be. So I was 28 years old. I was in labor with my second baby. I was in fact in the delivery room, anesthetized, because that's what she did back then. And suddenly I found myself flying. The only word I can think of for it, flying over a roof, which looked really peculiar. There were all kinds of metal boxes on top of the roof. But up the hill was the school where I taught, and I could see my classroom window. So I figured this must be the roof of the hospital. And I was flying over it, and apparently leaving town because I kept going. And pretty soon I could see the outline of the Hudson River, and I could see the landscape, and I was just shooting off into space. And it was not scary. I thought it was very interesting, because at one point, this was 1962, and at one point I could see the curvature of the earth, which
Wow.
one just didn't usually see. And my first response was to be very excited, like, oh, it really is round. But then I was just on into space, and at some point, a group of circles came towards me. They were just circles, but they clicked black to white, white to black, and they had a message for me, and the message was, "You're not real. You are not real. You never were real. Your life was not real. The world, the earth is not real. It was all, you were allowed to make it up. But it was a joke. It's just see what you could do. You could make this all up."
That must have been very, very shocking to have that revelation.
Shocking, shocking doesn't quite do it.
Would you say, all right, shocking's an understatement?
It's an understatement. I was in labor, for Pete's sake. I'm having a baby. The baby, they tell me, is not real.
Wow.
The baby at home, I know that baby at home. That's my Katie baby.
Mm.
Katie baby is not real. Nobody in your life is real. You have made them all up. And this discussion, such as it was, went on for some time, and I was debating furiously, coming up with arguments to prove that I must be real because I had evidence. But the evidence, like part of my evidence is robins. Who could invent robins? I mean, they're just so beautiful and so perfect. And no, robins, grass, trees, birds, ice cream cones. they're all made up.
Wow.
And then the circles went off someplace. I don't know where they went. They just kind of faded off into the distance. And I was alone in a giant emptiness. There was nothing, no thing is nothing. It's just me and this immensity. And that went on for quite a while. I don't know if it was quite a while, but it was a huge experience of immensity. And then I woke up. And my first conscious thought was, okay, Calvin was right. Predestination. And I'm on the wrong side. God has decided that I am not savable. And what else was I to say? You know, I was raised liberal Protestant. I didn't have a lot of theological elaboration at the ready. It didn't help that the baby had been born cyanotic, so they'd rushed her down to put her in an ice and lap, and they wouldn't let me see her. So was she real? So no, I'm back, but what does it mean to be back if you're not real? And where am I, and is it real? And who are these people, and are they real? There's my mother. They've already told me she's not real. Now, nothing about this experience matches the classic hell formula. There were no demons, no imps, no creatures tearing at my flesh. There were no lakes of fire. There were just circles and emptiness.
Nancy, tell us about these circles, because I know this is extremely significant in the experience. So here you are, and this voice, this is intelligence, is telling you, it's like that from the Beatles song where John Lennon says, "Nothing is real." Okay, yeah. So you're having your own cosmic strawberry fields, but not in a good way. But then you talk about these circles. What do you mean by the circles?
For the first 6 years, I meant circles because that they were round, perfectly round. 6 years after my experience, I opened a book and screamed because the left-hand page was a picture of one of the circles. Mm. And it terrified me because I said, oh my God, they're real. Somebody else knows about them. Well, somebody else certainly does, because it turns out the circles were the yin-yang symbol. But at the time of my experience, it's hard nowadays to think that any college-educated person in her late 20s who was a teacher, how could anybody not know a yin-yang symbol? Everybody knows what they are. In the early 1960s in New England and in this country generally, unless you were on the West Coast, most people didn't know about the yin-yang because Eastern influences had not yet arrived. So the fact that the yin-yang symbol came absolutely draped in significance to someone who understood anything about Eastern philosophy made no difference whatsoever to this New England congregation unless he didn't know anything about it. Much of the work of the succeeding almost 60 years for me has been how to blend the easy assumption of illusion, which is so basic to Eastern thought, with Western thought, which says that the physical world is everything. No, maybe not everything, but it's basic. And that has been the monumental struggle.
Yeah. Nancy, I want to ask you a question because I was really struck by, well, I was struck by a number of articles and of course your books, but I was really struck by one of the articles where you were talking about, how should I say it? Rite of passage, distressing NDEs as scary rites of passage. And I loved the way you put this forward because, you know, there are some of us, right, that get the visions of the dark side, let me just say. But because of our society, if we have these visions or attractions, I mean, you know, clearly I've read this. I've interviewed Carolyn Mace a bunch of times, so I understand it, but don't always agree with it. I mean, the fact that somebody may have a distressing NDE, right? Or have something like what you just described, we go to that next place. And I think this is so important in your research and your work. So we go to the next place is, I must be bad.
Yes.
I must be like a really like a criminal person. Or even if I'm not criminal now, oh, it must be like the movie Minority Report, where this is a premonition that I got this dark image and I'm going to be bad in the future. But aren't there even flawed people that get the bright vision? So this is really a stigmatized version of what happens to people. And if they don't have your insight, they could live a life with this, right?
That's precisely why I knew from the minute I discovered there was such a thing as near-death experiences. I knew I had to talk about them because you're exactly right. That is precisely how people respond. Again, because we are so accustomed to being in a reward and punishment culture. We say, oh, if you're good, you will get a good experience.
Right.
And if you're bad, you get a bad. So if I have had this terrifying experience, I must be really bad or it wouldn't have happened. Well, I have a few two-word comments for that, which I won't make, but
No, go right ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you though, because it is one of the most stigmatized and least talked about aspects of our living.
yes.
It really is. It is It is one of these things that when people talk about it, right? Now, my mom attempted suicide twice. Second time, she was very successful, but the first time, not so much. And when she started to talk about that experience, and I have letters from her that somehow my stepmother kept. I don't even know why my stepmother kept these letters from my mom in Bellevue Hospital, right? But when you read about them, it's no wonder why they kept her in Bellevue Hospital in New York, where they put people that hallucinate, right?
Right.
These are folks, and this is what your work is about, and this is what's so important about this conversation today. Boy, we are quick to judge and stigmatize people and characterize people for some super amazing experience that we could all learn from. How do we change that?
I wish I had a simple answer for how we change it, but like anything else, I think it's inch by inch and row by row. One grain of sand at a time. One conversation like this to people who had not heard this before. And maybe it gives someone a bit of understanding that one of the things that we are so resistant to the idea that good effects can come from bad situations. Do we think that all bad situations mean we're being punished? We have to start there and accept the idea that it's not just the idea, accept the reality that things happen. And one of the great boons to me, the best things that has come out of the years of research is the idea that, maybe that experience I had was not because God was throwing me out. Maybe I hit a psychic pothole. Maybe it was just a blip. There was a bump in my journey. And the whole purpose was to see, how is he going to get out of it? How many ways are there to get out of this? It's like the old Midrash tradition in Judaism, in which every bit of scripture can be debated in every possible way. You can pull it and twist it and turn it, but all of those meanings are in there. If this is what God said, then God gave us every possible meaning. So find the one that fits.
I had a thought, Nancy, and I'm sure you've discussed this, but the yin-yang symbol is opposite, equal, male, feminine. It's the duality of the universe. And yet in this incredibly spiritual experience, you're confronted with this intelligence that tells you nothing is real, you're not real. And then you're given the yin-yang symbol, which you don't discover about until quite some time after this. Do you think that this was all part of it, that you had to be given this distressing, this earth-shattering experience as the negative, which led you to the positive? Because, it doesn't seem like we're not real, okay? If I'm making all this up, then I need to make up a Ferrari sitting in my driveway, okay? But leaving all joking aside, what do you think? Do you think that this was some type of paradox, quandary, something, because this was very specific for you to set you on this entire life journey of understanding.
Well, it has been my experience of hanging around you that when you have a thought, it's worth paying attention to. And this, of course, you have just asked the great question. Does God have a plan? And or is there some super spiritual being up there, passing out tests and watching to see how we handle things? This is it's such a paradox. It's such a
Yeah.
I run out of intelligence when I try answering this level of question, because it's such an enormous question. If synchronicities are just the biggest mysteries in the world.
Yeah.
Speaking of yin yang symbols, this I feel like I'm in courtroom. So speaking of yin yang symbols, one can only think of the Buddha. Now, your book, The Buddha in Hell, is beyond fascinating and intriguing. And as a student of theology, I tend to think of Buddha as one of the good guys, but you have a fascinating account of the Buddha in Hell. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, and also, can we let folks know when this book is out and where it's available and how folks can find out more about Nancy? Because the article that I referenced is from the website, right? I mean, I think this is incredible that we're getting to talk with you, Nancy, on the heels of this, because this is such an important message for our time. So, Mark, what is the best way for folks to find out more about this?
Well, certainly if people contact the International Association for Near-Death Experiences, IANDS.org, go to the bookstore, the bookstore link. Also, Nancy's books are available on Amazon. So you just, go to Amazon and put in Nancy Evans Bush, and you're going to hit the NDE lottery with her books coming up. And the thing is, I've come to know Nancy, and she is a fascinating person and an incredible writer. And I've been honored to review her upcoming book. Let me tell you, it's good. So you need to read her first two books about distressing NDEs and the Buddha in Hell.
Yeah.
So the Buddha in Hell, how is it that the Buddha, Mr. Peace, Love, Understanding, and Non-Judgment, ended up in hell?
Well, this particular incident is, to my mind, a master class in be careful when you're interpreting somebody else's near-death experience. It came about because there was a country monk in Burma who just a simple backwater country boy who became a monk. He was not very well educated, but educated enough to be a monk. And he lived in a part of the country that had a great many Christian missionaries. And because they were part of his environmental background, he heard a lot about Christianity. He was never interested in it as its religion, but it was part of the vocabulary he understood. And then he had malaria, and in the course of the disease, he had a near-death experience. And in the near-death experience, he saw a lake of fire, and in the lake of fire were not only the Buddha, but all his teachers, the people he had revered and looked up to as a Buddhist monk. And he could not understand, why is the Buddha in the lake of fire? And the god of death was there, and the monk asked him, why is the Buddha out there in the fire? And the god of death said, it's because he didn't believe in the Christian teachings. Essentially, that's the story. The monk, when he woke up, was just like me. He was so shattered. How could this be true? But the experience was stronger in his mind than all his Buddhist teaching and his years of meditation. So he had this unquestioning faith in the truth of this experience he had had. It must be true. Now, just as any Christian or anyone who has an experience of hell, how do you interpret this experience? Because the monk was so torn up about this, he thought he owed it to the people of his country. He began going around preaching about Buddhists must convert to Christianity to avoid the lake of fire. Well, this was his deep conviction. Was he right? The Christians didn't like the fact that he really had very little understanding beyond this one vision. The Buddhists didn't like that he was talking against their religion and his native religion. And it upset a great many people. It still upsets a great many people. The blog post I did on the Buddha in Hell has for 6 years been the most requested, the most searched for post on my blog.
Wow.
And I used the anecdote in an attempt to say, look at all the circumstances. And again, going back to the Midrash idea, pull this apart every way you can think of. Where would he have gotten the idea of a lake of fire? Buddhism does not accept in some small segment talk about lakes of fire, but the Christian missionaries, some of them, talked about lakes of fire. Where would this monk have gotten the idea that if the Buddha didn't believe in what the Christians taught, he would go to a lake of fire?
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Well, funny. Let's not in the ha-ha sense, in the remarkable sense, is that Buddha and Jesus were so much alike.
Yeah.
It was all about peace, love, understanding. They were both of royal lineage. Jesus, descendant from King David through his mother Mary. Buddha, a wealthy prince, and they both gave up the materialist trappings. They both went into the wilderness for the better part of 40 days. They both were tempted by illusions and all this, and they both became enlightened. So, and it's also fascinating that perhaps the translation from that Asian language into English could also have been a misinterpretation. Also, people could be reading into it. It's like people reading into your NDE, your distressing near-death experience. At the time, it was shocking, but look what it's done. Because, Nancy, what you're teaching us is that a traumatic experience, and here we're talking about in the spiritual sense, you can either cave into it, or it opens the door to a higher vibration and a higher understanding. And that seems to be your experience.
Very definitely. That understanding does not come quickly. The daughter who was born during my experience is now 58. I'm just now finishing up book number 3 to say how I explain it. But so many people, if you think about it, people who have heart attacks, people who have cancer, mysteriously say when they're in remission or when they're cured, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Well, how can cancer be the best thing? Any of these experiences that stops us in our tracks, knocks the feet out from under us, turns us upside down and blows our sense of reality up. It makes us stop and think, and where are we, and what do we really believe, and what do we really value? And one of the things that struck me afterwards, it didn't at the time, but when I was first lying there in the hospital and the idea of predestination came up, they hadn't even released me before I had said, no, I don't accept that.
Yeah.
Predestination is a terrible idea. I don't care who made the doctrine. It's a terrible idea. It's a terrible God. And I will have no part of it. So I just kicked that right out of my thinking.
Good for you, Nancy. And that's an important lesson, because my experience is that there's a big difference between God and religion. And God is about peace and love and understanding. And, it's hard to be close to God when you have a mouthful of scripture and a heart filled with hate.
The hate is the problem. Scripture can be surprisingly liberating.
Yeah, I wanted to say that. I'm glad you said that right now, because here's the thing. I want to make sure, first of all, everybody knows how to get a hold of Nancy, and really check this out. You know, where I go to is dancingpastthedark.com. But here's what you said that really, I was waiting for you to say it. Grew up with a Catholic dad, my mom who committed suicide, and my stepmom, who is a non-denominational scripture, but really all positive. So we grew up in a family where she would say stuff like, hey, from the South, she would say, hey, girls, you know what? You got to heat up the pan and get that hot in order for you to get good fried chicken. Now, none of us really, we know she was not talking about the chicken. She was talking about our lives. She was talking about the fact that sometimes you're going to step into it and it's going to be hot.
Yeah.
And guess what? You're going to be delicious fried chicken. Now, that's a really short way of saying that this could be the possibility. You know, that what you're talking about is an immediate rejection of a path of gloom and doom. And you're right about it. I got a mystery disease in 2004, 6 months after starting this radio thing that I was never supposed to do. And a mystery disease that nobody could figure out, you know, where you're laying on the floor and you could hardly breathe, will stop you in your track. But your message for us is to help all of us literally annihilate the negative perception of what our future is supposed to be. Thank you for that. Mark?
Thank you, Nancy. And for more information about Nancy, go to dancingpastthedark.com, and her books, Dancing Past the Dark and The Buddha in Hell, you can find through her website, dancingpastthedark.com. Also, for more information about near-death experiences, consider joining IANDS, IANDS.org. I believe Nancy will be a speaker at the 2021 conference in Arlington, Virginia, next Labor Day, September 2021, and I hope to see you there. And I want to thank you so much, Nancy, for coming on the show. And you know what? We just reached the tip of the NDE iceberg. So, you know, Dr. Pat, I think we're going to have Nancy back.
Yeah, I want to ask Nancy one last question. I want to know what your personal message is. I want to know what you'd like to leave us with today, all of us.
Well, the thing I tell my Bible class all the time, and yes, I do teach a Bible class, not a typical Bible class, but and the question that keeps coming up is, what is the character of your God? Because the character of your God will determine the kinds of choices you make and the kinds of answers you can give to these important life questions. And it's the basis on which we establish whatever we consider our integrity. And at this point in our national and global and personal histories, we need all the integrity we can get. And integrity is always a positive. So that would be, it's a layer cake answer.
It's perfect.
It's perfect. Some days you and I have to chat. I studied integrity for 10 years. I researched the heck out of it. And you're absolutely right. It is our greatest challenge and our future. Thank you so much. Wow. Mark, what do you think?
Oh, let me tell you, we're having you back, Nancy.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure. It's an honor to have you here. And to find out more about Nancy's philosophy and research, Dancing Past the Dark and The Buddha in Hell, available on Amazon, and you can find them through ians.org and her website, dancingpastthedark.com. Thank you, Nancy, and to all of our listeners, many blessings. Namaste.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And boy, I knew there was something up with the Buddha. I just knew that. All right, everybody, we'll be right back.